starting point for today would be this statement by Nick Bowles. Because we don't build beautifully, people don't let us build much. And because we don't build much, we can't afford to build beautifully. When Nick made this statement, I'm sort of intrigued as to what he meant by beautifully, or beautiful. What sort of place did he have in mind? And I know that he's referred to schemes of Mary's here as beautiful, so maybe that's what he's got in mind. But the thing is with beauty, particularly when it comes to housing, is it has many aspects to it, and sort of a place that could be construed as beautiful could be different things to different people. I was born in a pretty run-down old small farm in North Devon. We were brought up just kind of doing the stuff kids do, really. Playing in rivers, climbing trees, making piles of straw from the grass that was cut. You name it. It certainly wasn't a beautiful environment in the sense that it looked nice. It was rough, it was poor, it was fantastically free environment in many respects. And I think what it taught me when I got into landscape, when I got into design, is that it isn't all about the appearances. And it was this really interesting, vibrant, certainly not attractive, but I think a beautiful way to grow up. It was free and easy. But then I went off, got educated, went to university, and what was interesting in that process was that suddenly people started telling me what beauty was. So through that education process, some of that kind of experiential sense of what actually made a beautiful life somehow got superseded by a more aesthetic understanding of beauty, that it was down to what the place looked like. And that was quite strong, and to be honest, I think what that did to me was made me quite unsure of what I was doing as a designer, because it seemed a pretty arbitrary thing to me to do, actually, to design a place to make it look nice. Because it seemed to me that there were lots of other things you could do in a place that was nothing to do with what it looked like. And I think one of the things that happened through that period for me and up until the sort of present day was an understanding that beauty was in housing, in the creation of environments, a little bit more than just what it looked like. It was about what you could do in a place. It was about what the community did. And to me, that sense of actually living in the street, knowing the community, creating a sense of place was actually what makes living in my part of Exeter really enjoyable. So that period of going through education, going through the late 1990s, early noughties, when we're all getting taught about what urban design is, when we're going to read the Urban Design Compendium and by design and all these things, and we've been taught about continuity and enclosure and character and all of the stuff that is meant to make a beautiful place, seem to ignore a lot of that. That basic quality of what you need to have in order to be able to live, if you like, a beautiful life. So maybe the notion of actually being able to live beautiful lives is a more useful thing to think about than the idea of beauty and of aesthetics. So how do we do that? How do we actually start to make more beautiful places? It would be really easy to think that it's just a matter of us all getting out there, banging the drum, getting more designers involved in residential projects, because actually 95% of them aren't done by designers at all. It'd be about re-establishing cave and giving it more teeth and all of that. But in reality, most housing, most environments have never been delivered by top designers working with top clients in a perfect planning system, delivering perfect outcomes. That's not how the built environment is created. Maybe 5, 10, 15% of it might be, but there's still a massive tranche of it. And even if we double the amount of exemplar schemes that we're building at the moment, if we're doubling the amount of house building over the next 10 years, we're going to have a hell of a lot of homes and places that are created that don't live up to the standards that we really aspire to. So what do we do about that? How do we actually start to affect that? How do we actually start to create the capacity for beauty? When you think about it, it's not really surprising that places that are created at the current time are not as beautiful as they could be. And that's because they are often squeezed into an infrastructure that doesn't have the capacity to accommodate them. They are brought forward in a planning system that focuses on the allocation of land rather than positive vision for settlements, often. And there are big forces driving what places look like and how they're driven. And I think it'd be really easy to just blame the developers, but it's not actually that simple. So we somehow need to think about how we shape those big processes that result in what places look like at the end of the day. And we need to think about, through those processes, can we deliver those basic conditions whereby beauty, a beautiful life, might actually prosper. In order to create more beautiful places, I think we need to think about what sort of infrastructure would allow those places to thrive, what sort of infrastructure would allow more beautiful places to grow and emerge. And in a sense, it's not at all surprising that we're really struggling to create beauty out of the infrastructure that we've got, because we are squeezing capacity out of a system that has no capacity. So we're putting developments into place where the roads are at capacity, there's poor connections into town centres, the ecological infrastructure of a place is often at breaking point. Communities don't want to see the housing, the community infrastructure is limited. And we're trying to solve that big capacity problem by actually asking the developers to solve the problem for us. So we're saying to people who are developing big schemes, well, yes, you can do that, but you're going to have to provide that road junction, you're going to have to provide a strategic mitigation for ecology over here, which has to be half the size of the site. You need to do this, this and this. And that burden on developers is such that it really does genuinely, and I know people will be sceptical of this, but it does genuinely make schemes unviable. And it's no surprise, therefore, that in order to still make a profit out of their basic process of building houses, that developers have to argue, well, we can't afford to do this, and we can't afford to do that, and we can't afford to do the nice things you'd like to have, because otherwise we're not going to be satisfying our shareholders and making a profit. And that's why, actually, in a lot of these schemes, we struggle to see the things that could make them beautiful, that could make them better places to live. So we've got to address that, and I think there's a fantastic opportunity to do that at this current time. And I think that opportunity comes from the fact that as a result of economic downturn, we're at last beginning to think about investing in infrastructure again. And I think there's a real opportunity for the Landscape Institute, for other professions to engage in a positive process of infrastructure planning, which actually is about putting in place the sort of infrastructure that's needed to create the sorts of places that we want. And by that I mean planning strategically for public transport, for green space, for climate change mitigation, for climate change adaptation, for the servicing of land so that it indeed can be built on, for community infrastructure, for the schools, and so on, that we need in order to make a place attractive and viable place in which to live. So there is an opportunity, I think, at the moment. It is captured in a number of initiatives that are coming forward. The Town and Country Planning Association are talking about garden cities, and that is quite an important thing, because it is talking about positively planning for large-scale growth. It's about investing in infrastructure over the long term to start putting in place the sorts of elements that we need to create the basic conditions whereby beauty can thrive. And there's some really good thinking going on that. But that's happening at a smaller scale as well. So developments like Cranbrook in Exeter are powering ahead at the moment. They're powering ahead because someone has taken the chance to get some money, to put the primary school in early, to get the strategic landscape mitigation, to get the green infrastructure in, the transport connections, and start building the qualities of a place. But the issue is that scheme, along like a whole range of other schemes, is not as good as it could be because it hasn't been boldly planned, it hasn't been driven by a strong vision, it hasn't been underpinned by a real sense of what are we trying to create here and how will we deliver it. So I'm cautiously optimistic that there are some projects going forward at the moment in which there are some really interesting processes of looking at how we strategically invest in more enlightened infrastructure than we have in the past. But I'm pessimistic because that infrastructure isn't as good as it could be. And what it needs is people with boldness and vision, people who are creative, people who understand delivery, people who understand influence, designers who are willing to engage with the mucky business of understanding that developers need to make a profit, and people who are willing to look at a vision and think, I'm going to make sure that vision happens rather than leave it to chance. And that's really where the opportunity lies. So to bring it back to the landscape profession, I suppose, the landscape profession has a fantastic heritage. It's got the fantastic heritage of New Lives, New Landscapes, Nan Fairbrother, Brenda Colvin, Crowe, Jellicoe, and a range of others. And indeed, people like my old tutor at Edinburgh College of Art, David Skinner, who did some fantastic stuff in his day. But something happened, I think, through the 80s, whereby we all got a bit timid, and we saw this horrible development was happening, this big expansion of post, end of 80s, when the credit boom happened. And we thought, well, we've got to do something about this. We've got to mitigate the impact of all this stuff. And I think somewhere we lost that kind of visionary zeal. And the opportunity for the landscape profession is to rediscover that creative zeal, to plan landscapes, infrastructure, communities on a large scale. And if we can do that, then in a small number of places we will start to see new types of place emerge that we can point to as examples. And when we've done that, we'll be able to start to turn this around, and because the sort of model that I'm talking about actually makes sense. It makes economic sense, it makes sense in terms of adding value to development, it makes sense in terms of adding value to people's lives. But it just hasn't really been done very effectively in this country, and it really needs the help of a strong design planning profession who are focused on that big scale boldness and vision that people like Colvin, Fairbrother and others had. So I will leave it at that. Thank you very much. I hope that was of interest, and I will hand over to the next speaker.